I usually don't tell this one. People expect stories about wrecks, shootings, and emergencies when they hear I'm a paramedic. But the truth? The scariest thing I've ever lived through didn't involve sirens or hospitals. It happened when I was 17 in Bloomington, Indiana, fall of 2002, one night in a treehouse. My friends Noah and Chase and I were bored teenagers, restless like most kids with nothing better to do. Chase's grandparents had a treehouse in their backyard, built when his mom was a kid. It was just plywood walls, a roof patched with old shingles, and a ladder. 10 feet up, if that. One Friday night, we dared each other to sleep out there. We called it camping, though it was really just dragging sleeping bags, pretzels, and a flashlight into a box in a tree. Chase's grandparents were at a fish fry. His mom didn't care, as long as we checked in, and we thought it would be fun. We hauled our stuff up around 9. The air was cool, leaves starting to give up their color, and you could smell wood smoke drifting from somewhere down the road. Inside, the floor was dusty, scuffed with old nails hammered flat. The window gave us a slice of the yard and part of the fence. For us, that was enough. Chase joked about setting a watch schedule. He wasn't really serious, but he scribbled our names on an envelope and dealt cards to see who stayed up. I pulled middle of the night duty. At the time, I thought it was funny. Later, it felt like fate. The first couple hours were harmless. We ate half the snacks without realizing it. Noah had his CD player and let one earphone dangle while he dozed. Chase narrated everything he saw out the window like he was reporting the news. A neighbor's dog trotting by, a moth smacking the wall, a porch light going out across the road. By 1, it was my turn. I sat by the window, flashlight by my knee, watching a yard that looked like any other. Beyond the tree line, you could faintly hear the highway, like a far-off ocean. I told myself I'd stay alert, but sometime after 2, I dozed off. I woke with that jolt you get when you think you've dropped something. I opened my eyes, looked out the window, and froze. At the base of the ladder, a man stood perfectly still, head tilted up, staring. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't call out. Just stood there with his hands at his sides, looking at the box of wood we were in. For a split second, I thought maybe it was Chase's grandpa. But it wasn't. He wasn't supposed to be home. And this guy wasn't acting like family. I whispered for Chase. He stirred, crawled over, and looked down. His hand clamped on my wrist without him even realizing. Noah joined us, rubbing his eyes. The 3 of us huddled at the window, watching this silent figure. "Hey," Chase finally called down. The man didn't answer. He tried again. "Sir?" Still nothing. The man didn't so much as twitch. I grabbed the flashlight, ready to shine it, but Chase shook his head. "Don't." He didn't need to explain. If we lit him up, it meant admitting we were kids, trapped up here with nowhere to go. So we sat in the dark, pretending stillness would protect us. Minutes dragged. Every noise, highway hum, creaks from the wood, even our breathing felt magnified. The man never moved. He didn't pace or cough or scratch. He just stood, as if waiting for us to come down. We whispered about calling the house phone, but none of us dared leave. Our landline check-in never happened. We took turns dozing for minutes at a time, jerking awake, hoping daylight would come faster. But every time we looked, he was still there, waiting. At some point, the sky began to lighten. A rooster crowed from across the road. When I finally dared peek out again, he was gone. We climbed down one by one, careful and quiet. At the base, the ground told its own story. Damp boot prints in the dew, circling the tree in orbits. He had walked around and around through the night, then stepped off toward the fence and vanished. Noah muttered, "Gone," but none of us sounded relieved. Inside, Chase's mom made pancakes, chatting like it was a normal Saturday. We lied and said we'd checked in, nodded when she asked if we stayed up late, and never mentioned the man outside. It felt safer to keep it to ourselves. I'm 35 now, and I've seen plenty as a paramedic. Traumas. But nothing unsettles me like remembering that night in the treehouse. The man never spoke, never touched the ladder, never tried to climb. He just waited below, patient as stone. And that silence has followed me into adulthood. When people ask about the scariest thing I've seen, I don't tell them about work. I tell them about boot prints circling a tree and the knowledge that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what someone does. It's how long they're willing to stand there, waiting. I'm 33 now, working as an EMT, and I've seen plenty. Blood on asphalt, twisted metal, the quiet weight of families waiting for answers. But the scariest thing I've ever lived through didn't happen on a call. It happened when I was 12, in a treehouse my dad built in Richmond, Virginia, during winter break in 2002. The treehouse was made of plywood walls, a hatch door with a bolt, and a square window cut by my dad's jigsaw. I kept a BB gun propped in the corner, binoculars, and a cheap thermos I used for cocoa. The ladder was sturdy, 2x4s with even rungs strapped to the trunk with metal braces. Dad used to say we should loosen the straps as the tree grew, but we never did. That winter was quiet, one decent snow, and nights that stayed cold enough to hold it. One evening I poured cocoa into my thermos, grabbed the BB gun to feel tough, and climbed up. Mom called from the back door, "Got your hat?" I pulled it low and waved. Inside, I sat with my back to the wall, looking out at the porch light cutting a triangle into the yard. At 8:47, I checked my watch. And that's when I heard one clean sound from the ladder. Not a branch in the wind, not an animal, the distinct groan of wood under weight. One step. I slid the hatch bolt into place and listened. Silence. No second step, no shuffle. I stayed still, telling myself it could have been the cold shifting the wood, but my body didn't buy it. 10 minutes later, at 8:57, it came again. Another creak, the exact same rung. This time it sounded like weight leaving, like someone stepping off. The problem was, if someone had climbed up and down, I should have heard more. 2 steps, 3. Not just 1 and 1, 10 minutes apart. I held my breath and put my cheek to the plywood, hoping for vibrations. Nothing. But above me came the sound of breathing. Human. Someone lying flat on the roof, face close to the seam. My BB gun felt like a toy. My only backup was Rook, our black lab mix, who usually preferred the heating vent. Tonight she was in the kitchen. At first, she gave a low huff toward the back door, then short barks, then full-on warning. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking up. I slid the hatch open, lowered myself onto the ladder, and climbed down slow, careful not to make the same noise I just heard. I didn't look up. Rook barked harder as I dropped to the ground. She wasn't staring at me. She was locked on the roof. I backed toward the porch, step by step. When I reached the rail, I bolted inside and threw the deadbolt. Mom asked what was wrong. Dad grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. He swept the light across the ladder, the trunk, the hatch. The roof was just a rectangle of frost. If there was breathing, it had stopped. Rook's ears were still forward, body tense, her eyes locked on the treehouse. Dad stayed out longer than I liked, then finally said, "Huh," the way men do when they don't want to confirm anything. He came back in and told me not to go outside again that night. The next morning, the yard looked ordinary. Snow showed tracks, cats, squirrels, birds, but no boots. Except on the 3rd rung of the ladder, faint smudges in the shape of soles pressing down. At the base, 2 short scraps of twine lay in the snow, frayed like they'd been tied and pulled free. Dad frowned, pointed, and didn't say much. Dana, his friend who'd helped build the treehouse, came later to measure for shelves. When Dad told him, he said, "When folks want to see if something will hold them, they don't go all at once." Then he tightened the bolts on the ladder straps and left it at that. Years later, the treehouse came down. The maple kept its scars. On calls, when people ask me what the scariest thing I've ever lived through was, I don't talk about wrecks or heart attacks. I talk about a winter break, a cup of cocoa, and a ladder that creaked twice. Once up, once down, with 10 long minutes between. And breathing on the roof that never should have been there. I grew up in Laramie, Wyoming, and if you've ever been there, you know it's the kind of place where summer days are wide open and endless. In the summer of 1995, I was 7 years old. My dad and I built a treehouse together in the cottonwoods that bordered our backyard. It wasn't much by most standards. 4 plywood walls, a flat roof, and a little window cutout. But to me, it was a fortress, a lookout post, a secret hideout. One wall had a knothole, the kind that happens when a branch gets cut through in the wood. The knot had popped clean out, leaving a perfect little circle. I called it my spyglass. From that knothole, you could look out into the tree line at the edge of the property, where the woods started. I spent hours up there, staring out, pretending I was watching for enemy troops, or just daydreaming with a comic book in my lap. Most nights were the same. I'd drag up a blanket, a flashlight, and sometimes a can of soda, and I'd sit with my legs dangling while the crickets sang. Dad didn't mind, as long as I was in bed before midnight. He said a treehouse was a kid's right, and he wasn't wrong. Every memory I had of that summer seemed to center around that little wooden box in the trees. One evening, right as the sun dipped low and the air cooled, I leaned into the knothole. I was expecting the same view I always had. Darkening woods, long grass swaying, maybe a rabbit darting through. But this time something filled the circle. An eye. It was human, no question. Brown, with tiny red veins spidering in the white. It wasn't moving, not even blinking at first. It was just there, looking back at me. My first reaction wasn't to scream. It was confusion. My 7-year-old brain couldn't make sense of it. I remember thinking, maybe it's one of my friends messing with me. Maybe Dad is pulling a prank. But then, after what felt like forever, the eye blinked. And then, after a few seconds, the eyelids slid shut completely, like whoever it was had just decided to close their eye. That's when I screamed. I scrambled down the ladder, half slipping on the last rungs, and tore into the house shouting for Dad. He grabbed his rifle from the closet without a word. That was just who he was, practical. If his kid said someone was outside, he was going to check. I followed him out into the yard, staying just behind his leg while he swept the flashlight across the cottonwoods. "Where?" he asked me. "The treehouse, the knothole." He raised the beam toward the walls, toward that little window and the opening I'd been looking through. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the creak of branches in the wind. Then, he walked past the base of the tree, sweeping the light over the grass. No footprints. No broken branches. Nothing to suggest anyone had been standing there at all. He stayed out there for nearly half an hour, circling, checking the woods. I remember the way the rifle barrel glinted under the flashlight beam when he shifted his grip. Finally, he lowered it and said, "Probably your imagination, son. Eyes play tricks in the dark." Part of me wanted to trust him, but I couldn't unsee it. The next day, when the sun was high and I felt braver, I climbed back into the treehouse. I went straight to the knothole. The wood around the outside edge of the hole looked like it had been chewed open. Fresh, pale slashes of raw grain still exposed. Like someone had taken a knife or a stick and worked at it, enlarging it, from outside. I called for Dad. He climbed up behind me, looked at the hole, and frowned. He didn't say much, just rubbed his jaw. But I could see it on his face. He believed me now, at least a little. I didn't stop using the treehouse, though I should have. I was stubborn. I told myself I wouldn't let some stranger, some weirdo, scare me out of my own place. Still, things felt different. Every rustle in the woods I noticed. Some nights I thought I heard faint breathing when I leaned near the knothole, though it could have been wind through the branches. I never saw the eye again. Not directly. But I always had the sense that if I pressed my face too close, if I lingered too long, something would be there. I'm 32 now, a commercial pilot. I spend a lot of nights in cockpits, with my thoughts staring out through thick glass into pitch black skies. You'd think nothing could scare me after flying through turbulence and lightning storms. But sometimes, in the quiet between radio calls, I find myself looking at my reflection in the windshield. Because whoever was out there in those woods that summer, whoever scraped at that knothole just to get a better look inside, they knew exactly where I'd be every night, watching me while I thought I was the one doing the watching. And that thought has never left me. I was 13 the summer it happened. These days I'm 27, but I still think about that summer in Helena, Montana more often than I'd like. Back then, my life revolved around a treehouse. My dad had built it years before out of leftover lumber from a shed project. And though it wasn't anything extravagant, just 4 walls, a roof of mismatched shingles, and a plywood floor, it felt like my own little fortress. My buddies liked it too, but most nights I was up there alone, sprawled on a beanbag, with comic books, a bag of pretzels, and my trusty flashlight. Helena summers have those blazing hot days, then evenings that cool down fast once the sun dips behind the mountains. I'd climb up just after dinner, listen to crickets starting their chorus, and stay there until I got too tired or the flashlight batteries gave out. It was my sanctuary from the chaos of being 13. Awkward growth spurts, parents bickering, and the loneliness that creeps in when you feel caught between being a kid and not quite a teenager. The first night it happened, I didn't even process it as strange. I was sketching superheroes by flashlight when I heard my mom's voice calling my name from the woods. Eli. Clear as day, coming from the dark. My first thought was practical. Maybe she wanted me inside. So I shoved my comics into the corner and clambered down the ladder. But when I burst through the back door, she was in the kitchen rinsing dishes. "What is it?" she asked, like I'd startled her. "You called me?" She shook her head. "No, honey, I didn't." I felt silly and went back outside, chalking it up to echoes or my imagination. But it happened again the next night. Same time, just past 9:30. This time the voice was a little different, like my mom was annoyed. "Eli, come here." Once again, I scrambled down, only to find her in the living room watching TV. She gave me a weird look when I told her, then brushed it off. Voices carry in the summer. Someone probably called their kid. That explanation might have worked if it didn't keep happening. Every night, almost on schedule, the woods called my name. Sometimes soft and coaxing, sometimes irritated. Always in my mother's voice. I started running tests. I'd bring my watch up and note the time. 9:27, 9:34, 9:29, always in that window. I left a radio playing in the treehouse one night, went inside and sat by the kitchen window. Sure enough, at 9:31, I heard my name carried through the night. My mom was sitting across from me at the table eating a peach. That's when the fear really took root. The treehouse stopped feeling like a fortress and more like a stage, lit up for someone in the woods to watch. I'd shine my flashlight into the trees, but the beam only reached so far before it got swallowed. Every branch looked like an arm, every shadow like a crouching figure. One night, I decided to call back. "What do you want?" I shouted, bluffing confidence I didn't have. Silence. I remember sitting there, every muscle tight, waiting. Then, just as I lowered the flashlight, the voice came back, whispering this time. My name, drawn out slow. Eli? I bolted that night. Nearly fell off the ladder in my rush. My mom was in bed already. She asked why I was so jumpy, but I couldn't explain it without sounding crazy. The worst came a week later. By then, I was avoiding the treehouse, but part of me felt stubborn. I didn't want to be scared out of my own space. So I climbed up with my sketchbook, left the flashlight on the floor, and told myself I'd stay put no matter what. At 9:32, the voice came. Eli. I gritted my teeth and didn't move. Eli, it said again. Then, I see you in the window. I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun across the plywood floor before rolling into the corner. My throat locked up. Without thinking, I scrambled down the ladder so fast I scraped both shins and sprinted into the house. I locked the back door, ran to my parents' room, and told them someone was outside. Dad grabbed a baseball bat and stomped around the yard while Mom held me back. He found nothing, just silence, broken only by the neighbor's dog barking. They said it was a dream, or imagination. Kids spook themselves, they reminded me. But I knew what I heard. The voice wasn't just calling me, it knew where I was. After that, I refused to go back in the treehouse at night. During the day, it was fine. Bright, harmless, just a wooden fort in a quiet backyard. But as soon as the sun dipped, I shut the curtains and stayed inside. Even now, 14 years later, I still can't shake it. If someone calls my name in the dark, I tense up instantly. Sometimes when I visit my folks and walk past that treehouse, I swear I expect to hear it again. The part that keeps me up isn't the what, it's the how. Whoever it was or whatever it was, it sounded exactly like my mom. Same tone, same cadence. And it knew my name. I've never figured out who or what was in those woods. But I know one thing. It wasn't my imagination. I've told this story a handful of times, but never in full. My daughter was 6 years old in the summer of 2000, and we had just moved into a quiet house on the edge of Missoula, Montana. It was one of those older places with quirks you either learn to love or fight against forever. Sticky windows, mismatched tiles, a basement that smelled faintly of earth. Out back, tucked between two tall cottonwoods, was a treehouse. It wasn't much, just weathered boards and a slanted roof, but to a 6-year-old it was a castle. The family who lived there before us had built it for their kids. They'd even left behind a little wooden ladder nailed right into the trunk. Lily fell in love with it instantly. I figured, what harm could there be? A treehouse in the backyard felt wholesome, almost idyllic. Every afternoon, she'd disappear into the treehouse with her dolls, a blanket, and sometimes a juice box. I'd hear her singing to herself through the open window while I folded laundry or cooked dinner. That was the rhythm of our summer. Me inside, her out in the treehouse, her laughter filtering through the screen. But within a couple of weeks, I started noticing little things. When I'd call her in for dinner, she'd yell back, "I can't leave yet, he's still here." I assumed she meant one of her dolls or an imaginary friend. Lots of kids invent playmates, and Lily was imaginative. I thought it was sweet. The first time I asked her who he was, she said, "My friend. He lives in the treehouse. He doesn't like adults, so he hides when you come around." I laughed at the time. It sounded exactly like the kind of rule a kid would make up. But after that, I started noticing how she would clam up whenever I tried to approach the treehouse myself. If I so much as stepped off the porch, she'd lean over the railing and shout, "Go back inside, Mommy. He won't come out if you're here." At first, I humored it. Childhood imagination. But then things started to get weird. Around the middle of July, Lily began resisting bedtime. She'd get upset, begging me to let her sleep outside. She'd say, "He gets lonely at night. He wants me to stay." Her eyes were always wide and serious when she said it, like she was scared of letting him down. One night, I found her drawings spread across the dining table. Most of them were stick figures. Lily, me, our dog, and then another figure labeled simply, him. But the him figure had no face, just a blank oval where the features should have been. I asked her why she didn't draw his face. She shrugged and said, "He doesn't want me to." That answer unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Her sleep started suffering too. She'd toss and turn, whisper in her sleep. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of her pacing in the hallway at 2 in the morning. When I tried to put her back in bed, she'd ask if she could just go check on him real quick. The breaking point for me came one night near the end of July. I tucked Lily into bed, read her a story, and finally got her to close her eyes. An hour later, the house was quiet, or so I thought. I went to refill my water glass in the kitchen, and through the window I noticed the faintest glow in the treehouse. I thought maybe it was the moon hitting just right, until I realized it was Lily's small flashlight. I hurried out, barefoot in the grass. My heart sank when I saw her curled up inside the treehouse, fast asleep, her flashlight beside her. For a moment, I just stood there, staring up at her, unsure whether to wake her gently or scoop her up. That's when I heard the creak of movement across the boards, heavier than Lily. I froze, holding my breath to hear better. Then came the sound of footsteps, quick, light, scampering across the planks. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I climbed the ladder as I whispered her name. She stirred but didn't wake. I scooped her up, my chest tight with panic, and as I did, I swear I felt the vibration of something shifting across the wood behind me. I didn't turn around. I climbed down with her in my arms, rushed inside, and locked every door. The next morning, I went out to look at the treehouse in daylight. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed faint footprints in the dust on the floorboards, too big to be Lily's. I told myself, maybe I'd imagined the footsteps the night before. Maybe the prints were old. But I couldn't ignore the way Lily's behavior had escalated. That same day, she asked me why I'd taken her away when he wasn't done talking to her. That was the last straw. Within a week, I had the treehouse torn down. The boards went to the dump, the nails tossed out, the ladder cut into pieces. Lily cried when she realized it was gone, but eventually she stopped mentioning her friend. She's an adult now and doesn't remember much from that summer. When I bring it up, she just laughs and says I probably let her imagination get the best of me. But I can still hear those footsteps in my mind, and I know what I felt that night. Another presence moving across the wood, lingering far too close to my child. Even now, 20+ years later, I avoid playground forts and backyard treehouses. I can't walk by one without feeling the same prickling unease. And sometimes I wonder, if I'd turned around that night instead of rushing down the ladder, what would I have seen? If tonight's stories reminded you that childhood hideouts aren't safe forever, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and tell me in the comments which of these stories made you rethink your childhood hideouts. And if you think neighbors are the least of your worries, you're wrong. Click now to watch 4 scary neighbor horror stories. Because monsters don't always lurk in forests. Sometimes they borrow your lawnmower. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.